If you're in the beginning stages of your art journey, there's a good chance that your work sucks. I'm not saying this to be mean, I'm saying it because that's usually how it goes. My work used to suck, and I've looked at the work of many of my favorite artists from when they were first starting out, and their work also sucked. It's just we all start out not really knowing much about how to paint. We don't have the skills, we don't have the knowledge, and our work reflects that. But the problem and the subject of this entire video is that I constantly see beginners who jump straight into these huge, huge paintings that they then post online and they proudly declare that they spent 300 plus hours on, and they're terrible. They're just beginner paintings, which is to be expected because they are beginners. When you're first starting out as an artist, you need mileage. You need to experiment with things. You probably don't know what type of colors you can mix with the colors that you have. You don't know what type of marks your brushes can make. And you don't know what your style is because you have never tried any of this stuff. So you need to put in the work to figure all of this out. And it's a lot easier to do that by making a bunch of different paintings that you can experiment with rather than to hyper focus on a single piece that's going to take you weeks to finish. Because the thing is, your basic skills are just not where they need to be yet in order for you to create the type of work that you want to make. You know, your compositions, your values, your color knowledge, your shape language, you may not even know what some of these things are. And when you try and overtake such big projects, your foundations are going to be shaky. And it doesn't matter how much work and effort you put into it, it's just going to end up looking like a polished turd. Working on huge pieces that take you a long time as a beginner, it's going to hold you back from progressing as fast as you could. Because let's say that it takes you 40 hours to make a painting, right? You could take those 40 hours that you dedicated to a single painting, a single composition, a single subject, a single color scheme, and you could put it towards 40 paintings that you only spend 1 hour on. And that's going to be 40 different compositions, 40 different subjects and ideas and color palettes. You're going to learn so much more by doing those paintings than you will by endlessly refining the single painting that you started. And I know that some of you are probably thinking, but I can't make a decent painting in 1 hour. Most of your paintings, let's be real, are you're going to hate them. I mean, I know if I look back at all the paintings that I did when I first started out, there's like a few that are salvageable, but most of them are just bad. And they were bad back when I made them. But it's a lot less frustrating when you spend 1 hour on a painting and it doesn't work out compared to spending 100 hours on a painting and it doesn't work out. Because if you only spend an hour on a piece and it turns out bad, you can just toss it in the trash or just paint over it. It's not that big of a deal and you won't feel as bad. And on top of saving time, you're also going to save on materials because you're not going to need as much paint to make a tiny little painting. And to be clear, the goal of making these little paintings that take you 45 minutes to an hour and a half is not to create masterpieces. The goal is to become more and more familiar with the process of painting, to become more familiar with how your tools work, with what kind of results you can achieve, with what colors you can mix with the colors you have available, with what colors work for certain things and what colors don't, with what makes a good composition and what makes a plain composition. Because the truth is that a painting is really made in the early stages. If something doesn't read well, once all your major shapes and overall colors and values are in place, it does not matter how much time you put into detailing and refining, it's not going to look that good. It's like a house built on shaky foundations. If your foundations are messed up, it doesn't matter how well you furnish the house or how well you paint it, it's eventually probably going to collapse. And sometimes some of these paintings will actually work out. You'll capture something that looks good. And at that point, you can take that and you can either continue to refine it. You can just say, screw the timer and keep going for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. Or you can take the small painting and use it as a reference for a bigger, more fleshed out piece. And to be clear, I don't think I mentioned this, but this is what worked for me, okay? Maybe some other people will jump into the comments and say that this is a stupid idea, but I picked this up by many other professional artists that I learned from, and it worked very well for me. It allowed me to improve a lot faster. So how do you actually practice this? What are some tips that you can use to go ahead and start doing it this way. Well, what worked for me and what I did were three things. Number one was working small. Number two was working with large brushes, brushes that felt a little too big to feel comfortable. And number three, timers. I would usually set timers between 45 and 90 minutes, depending on whether I was more focused on really loosening up and simplifying things and just capturing that, again, overall impression of my subject, or if I wanted to have a little bit more time to, flesh out my painting a little bit more. Another reason why doing this is so valuable is because it teaches you so many good skills that will be very helpful for you in your journey as an artist. Things like simplification, figuring out where to paint details and where to imply them, brush efficiency, and a variety of other things. So back to how to do it. You work small. A lot of my work was between 5x7 and 6x8, sometimes smaller than that. I made a lot of paintings in sketchbooks that were about 3.5 by 5.5 inches, so about this big, really small. Because working small means that you can cover the canvas a lot faster. And it forces you to simplify things because you don't have the room to put in every tiny little detail unless you go in with a magnifying glass. Number two is using large brushes. What a large brush is depends on how big you're working, but usually you should find something that you feel a little uncomfortable with, something that feels a little too big, and then you can probably go up an exercise. And by the way, this works with any medium. Even if you paint digitally, I did a ton of studies like this on my iPad. And all you do is you zoom out a little bit. You don't zoom in. You just leave your image on your screen so that it's a workable size. It doesn't have to be thumbnail size, but it shouldn't be so big that you can see everything. And of course, you can do the same for the brush. You can just increase the brush size until you get to a point that feels right. Then I would start my timer, and the first thing I would do would be to quickly and roughly sketch out my composition. Emphasis on the quickly and roughly. This should take less than 5 minutes. Try to get your shapes, your major masses in there. This is not even something you need to do. In fact, as I got more and more comfortable with this process, I started sketching less and less. So instead, I would just jump straight into the painting process. Step two is to block out your major shapes with color. Try and mix something that's as close to what you're seeing as you can get. The point of this is to just block out the white and just have something to work with. And from then to the end is just the process of looking at the painting, trying to see what needs to be adjusted and fixing it. And as always with painting, you should be working big to small, general to specific. So if you're painting a tree, I always say tree because that's what I paint a lot of. If you're painting a tree, you might put down a green blob first, and then as you move on, you slowly start to carve out more of the details on that tree. Eventually, at the very end, you might add the last few touches to indicate individual leaves and individual branches and the texture on the trunk or something like that. And then at the very end, in the last 10-15 minutes, depending on how long you've given yourself, that's when you can actually slow down and focus on tying things together. So you're going to add your brightest highlights, your darkest darks, your sharpest details, because those are the things that really help a painting read as the subject that you're painting. No matter how loose the overall painting is, as long as you have just a few key indicators, people will be able to tell what it is that you're painting. So these things could be maybe the last bright touches on a snowy mountaintop, or the brightest reflection in a body of water, or maybe maybe you're painting some sort of scene with a city in the distance, so you might add the little dots to imply the city lights. This is my advice to you: don't waste your time on huge paintings that are probably going to be bad, and don't feel bad if they do look bad, whether they're big or small, because if you're a beginner, that's part of the process. You cannot expect to be as good as the professional artists that you're inspired by, because you're not there yet. But they were where you are now. We all were. But this is something that for me worked as not a trick, but it was a way for me to speed up my learning process and get to where I wanted to be a lot faster, a lot more efficiently, and it was a lot more fun because again, I was able to draw and paint all sorts of things instead of focusing on one single thing for weeks at a time. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe, tell your friends, and I will see you guys in the next one.